Hey, fish dried wontons here. I apologize for the delay on this episode, but most of this month has been dissociating while doing assignments. Dissociating while doing podcast was not an option for me. That's what my crying time is for. But like they were not going very well together, so this is a little later than expected. But I hope you enjoy this episode, and I'm just gonna cue the fucking. I had a hunch before starting this episode that maybe I'm overdoing starting the episodes with Arctic Monkeys lyrics, and I thought it'll get annoying for the audience, but now I've taken it up as to how long does it take for somebody to comment for me to stop. So I'm gonna do it until then. And the reason I bring that up is because this time I thought about this episode when I was listening to Fluorescent Adolescent by the Arctic Monkeys. I'm pretty sure that's one of the songs that everybody's heard from the Arctic Monkeys. It's one of their impression songs right after Do I Wanna Know and Are You Mine? It's not very difficult to be entirely certain as to what the song might be about. I think the first verse of this song itself, he says, "The Bloody Mary's lacking in Tabasco. Remember when you used to be a rascal." But the line before that is what really interests me, where he says, "Nothing seems as pretty as the past, though." And I'm assuming that's because the song is about a lady. Well, I assume it's a lady, but who am I to say fishnets and night dresses can only be worn by ladies? So it's about this person who clearly used to be a life of the party type person and now has turned into a suburban, tired human. I mean, something about meeting this person much after in their life is also comes up because he does say, "You took a left off last laugh lane and then where did you go?" Whatever. The song's not important. I'm sorry. I feel like I always go on rants about these songs. What's more important in the current discussion is the emotion that is addressing to, or the cognition that is addressing to, which is reminiscing about the past. And I've seen my demographic, and I knew that I had to bring this episode to the 90s kids because they will only remember. What was I thinking when I wrote that joke? Anyway, today I just wanted to talk about what does it mean to reminisce about the past, why does it happen, and where did it come from, and why do we recognize it enough to assign a word for it. I think I've talked about this before. Richard Rorty's literature sort of threw me in this direction where you need to assign vocabulary to describe things that are extremely important. But he meant by that is you know the observations that you've made, you just don't have the words to assign and structure that information, which is what you're doing most of the time when you're engaging in conversation, acquiring a vocabulary that is more permanent about stuff. That again, another tangent, I'm sorry. So let's go back to the time when this word was found, and it was found in 1688 by Johannes Hofer, a Swiss medical student. And I remember we talked about this during the Talking About Truth episodes, part 1 and part 2, where we discussed how most of the work that happens when it comes to acquiring knowledge is making an observation in the real world and then making an approximation of objective reality. And that's what we've been doing. And on the way there, you have some very interesting conversations happening because your assumptions about the world are so fundamentally wrong in some places, or fundamentally misunderstood. I mean, I'm not gonna blame somebody in the 6th century for thinking the earth is flat. In the 21st century, they're an idiot. In 6th century, it's fine. They don't have the tools. For what they have, they're doing great. And 1688 had one of these moments about nostalgia. Basically, the military physicians who were treating these Swiss mercenaries who were serving away from home had diagnosed the soldiers with high fever and stomachache and pain and sometimes loss of appetite to the degree that it resulted in death. And the physicians generally thought that they had malady or trauma that was received from hearing constant cowbells in the Swiss Alps. But then Johannes Hofer had a big brain moment where he said that it's because of their emotional predisposition and their mental faculties that they feel sick because they're far away from home. And he took two Greek words, which are nostos, which is home, and algos, which is sickness or ache, and made a new symptom called nostalgia, where people are sick because they're far away from home. And the reason I took so much time for telling you that is because there was a time in the history of Europe where you could say, "Nah, man, I'm not going to work today, I'm too nostalgic." And I think that's beautiful. I think it's worth appreciating for at least 2 seconds. And it was a little less funny at the time if you were just witnessing it, because military generals from Switzerland thought this was a particularly Swiss affliction, that there was a predisposition for Swiss people to have this disease. So they would ban songs about the homeland when they were on tour, like the military was on tour, and they were genuinely afraid that singing about your homeland would lead soldiers to desertion or even suicide. Of course, towards the 1800s, when they were trying to locate the nostalgia bone, because that was a thing that we believed in, that everything must have a physical manifestation when it comes to mental faculties, they also associate nostalgia to melancholia, which now we understand to be depression. It's kind of an interesting parallel as to how our understanding of mental health has changed over the time. I mean, I know I'm going on a tangent. I'm completely aware. I'm not going to bring you back by saying I was going on a tangent. But a fair number of you would know about shell shock becoming post traumatic stress disorder, and in the middle being battle fatigue. The reason those things were called that is because that's where the diagnosis was made, but eventually we had to generalize the vocabulary for that clinically so that we can diagnose it for people who've never seen war, for people who go through trauma because of accidents that happen in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean or even on the car ride home, whatever. So that's sort of how this is. Melancholia was just a condition that people thought was preceded by suicide, and nostalgia was associated with, if not considered to be, a type of melancholia, and eventually it was a sign that people are eventually going to kill themselves. I'm not lying. That's exactly how the medical faculties treated nostalgia in the 1800s. 100 years down the line, institutional study of psychology starts, namely with Freud as the spearhead of the movement, or the academic that is mostly doing the work in this field, and then the New Freudian school and whatnot. And during this time, a more consensus follows towards the middle of the 20th century, where we're thinking that nostalgia is the pathological necessity or inclination of humans to want to return to the childhood because of the sheer comfort that they enjoyed as a child. A lot of you would be familiar with this word regression, which is when a person stops acting their own age and acts like a child, which is exactly what a form of nostalgia was considered to be for a very long time, that people just reminisce a time where they were dependent and taken care of and comfortable and want to return to that time, and there is an emotional predisposition of the same, which is nostalgia, and all nostalgia roots from this necessity to do the same. But of course, things are not as simple as they sound to be in this version of the story. Further down the line, we find out about the lifespan retrieval curve. Basically, it's a graph of how many memories are formed at what age and what is the likely outcome of you reminiscing them or remembering them with a sense of permanence as an event in your life. The graph is a horizontal S, and towards the tipping end of your life, the first 10 years of your life is something called the childhood amnesia. You don't have clear memories of what happened, you have snippets, which is why you'll notice that the things you remember from your childhood are incidents narrated to you by your parents or adults who were taking care of you at the time. The age of 12 to 30 is when most of your memories are formed with a sense of permanence. And after that, what starts is the period of recency, where everything you remember is uh, to be happened in the recent past. And of course, this differs for a lot of people because of how we map our time and how we store our memories in our brain. Most people do it in the terms of life events. For example, ending school, going to college, moving cities for a job, moving cities as change in professions, or getting married, none of which are compulsory, by the way. But these are usually how people put their memories in cohorts. But it is likely that they remember their 20s as a completely different time than their recent past, which starts post the age of 30 or 32. Not to mention, there is a dimension of just missing youth. There is a absence of responsibilities that are shared as adults. There is lack of fatigue from being an adult, which is a completely real thing. But mostly nostalgia is now linked to the sense of identity that a person has about themselves. And the sad part about that is that it's not as much of a psychological concept as it is a subjective philosophical one. Not to say that it's not important in the science of psychology, I do not mean to say that. But The exploration of the same is not here in the realm of psychology, it's more in the realm of philosophy, at least to me. But also, psychology is a subset of philosophy, and any dissonance, discomfort, or crisis in determining or defining your identity is likely to result in some amount of psychological discomfort. So, they're very interlinked concepts. And nostalgia in that context is you trying to define your identity or reminiscing your sense of identity with a time and place. I say place because place is sort of inevitable because every place is different with context of time, but mostly it's past. It's your past that you associate yourself with, and it is a valid association. Your past is what makes you. Technically, your experience is all you have. And it is now more clear than ever that one of the most successful ways of creating cohorts of people is generational identities. Especially people on the internet would relate quite heavily. There's a reason why Gen Y and Gen Z agree with each other so much and they get along because they're all the same age. It's a concept that matters quite a lot. And if there's anything that I've learned from this Indian struggle against the British colonial rule is that if something is bad enough, people will forget their differences and unite against the one big bad, and nothing is worse than existential dread and the fear of death. Most people who are the same age face the same problems at the same time, which is why they group together and they form their identities, and it's a place and a time that people share. For example, most people who grew up from anywhere between 1990 to 2010 remember the old Ghadi ad, and everybody will sing along to something like that. And one of the evolutionary purposes that nostalgia serves is that it saves you from feeling lonely. The reason people go on dates and look for common ground to talk about or common things to talk about is because that's what solves the question as to what should I talk about. And common interest of nostalgia is unavoidable if you grew up in the same place and time. I mean, in some cases, you don't even have to grow up in the same place. If you were in close enough proximity of the culture, you would know the same things. The perfect example of this would be memes. For example, there I was with barbecue sauce on my titties is something everybody from the 2010s who had any access to the internet and understood the English language remembers because Vine was a thing at the time and everybody watched these videos. And nostalgia evolutionary just serves the purpose of you not feeling lonely, you finding common ground with people who shared the same experience and you associating yourself with them as a part of that group, which is why 90s kids get so sentimental about things that they remember. And that's where we enter some of the more cultural aspects of nostalgia, because remember that generational and even cultural gatekeeping is a very real thing. Because I love the only 90s kids will remember meme because it's just so powerful. Because when generational nostalgia started for people as young as 21, and I was their first instinct was to compare it to what is on Cartoon Network now and tell the children who were alive at the time that my childhood was better than yours. And that sort of leads me into a bigger problem that I have with the older generations, people who are older than me anyway, and it's something that you would relate to. I think most people who I know who are older than me have the self awareness to realize when they're doing this, and they just compare themselves to their parents who are the primary people accused of doing this behavior without realizing how cringy it really is because it leads into another concept called Juvenoia. Juvenoia is a feeling that the future isn't currently good enough for people, or the young are leading the future into a direction of absurdity and darkness. Basically, I'm talking about boomer talk. If you don't know what boomer talk is, it's basically back in my day, we used to walk to school and fight an alligator on the way. Some shit like that. You know what I'm talking about. You've heard somebody's parents talk about these things. Okay, boomer was such a big meme that it was impossible to ignore this entire conversation about how the old people keep chastising the young people, and the young people finally responded back with just the generational narrow minded outlook that they're locked in and their Juvenoia is talking to us harder than anything else. And if you think old people can be cool, that is true. But old people can reduce their amount of coolness just by being juvenile. And it's very sad to watch. I remember there was a time in my life, this was a long, long time ago. This was back when YouTube was new to me. Like, this is the strange temporal territory of the late 2000s when I was listening to Green Day on loop, literally on loop, until 2016. But the point I'm trying to make is that there was a time when I thought Bill Maher was the coolest person ever. He had this show called Real Time with Bill Maher. I don't know what its previous editions were called, but I used to love, love, love his show. And I used to watch like just videos of him talk about atheism because I was one of those people. I think I've admitted that before. I was a little combative about my atheism for a while. And I thought Bill Maher was cool, which he is. He talks about the rights for legalization of marijuana since before it was cool. He's been talking about atheism pretty single handedly for a very long time. But Bill Maher has gotten old, and I mean old, old. And there is no excuse for the amount of boomerism that he's done on his show. Now, for example, I know that Bill Maher enjoys talking about how Democrats are his dog in the fight in American politics, which is great. Good for him. His politics and like whatever, however he puts his opinion out is very engaging. But the sheer amount of cringe when he goes on a rant about young people is sad. It is difficult to watch. Luckily, he never got married, so he never makes those wife bad jokes. But technology bad is Bill Maher's favorite kind of jokes. Like, I can see a little smirk on his face when he does it. I remember this was a long time ago, I think about 3 or 4 years ago. He made this episode of New Rules about how social media is the new nicotine. And I understand you're trying to make an analogy and like it's a regular thing that you do making new rules. But bro, nicotine and social media are not the same thing. Nicotine was made for luxury consumption, social media is made for engagement and talking to other people. Like, mass communication has changed. Like, YouTube is the new printing press. Like, I know it is true that our phones demand a lot more attention from us than required, and it is addictive. It is completely possible to get addicted to your phone. But nicotine and cigarettes is not the same association as addiction of phone and addiction of social media. Social media is used to outreach to people. There is activism that happens online which leads us to your show and sort of popularizes the movement that you have putting your back on. So a little bit of balance there would have helped. But I can see that his generational identity gets in the way of doing that balance. But my opinions on Bill Maher aside, I believe that nostalgia as a cultural trope is in serious danger of because of how overused it is. Like, for example, I love it when somebody like Capcom reconstructs a game like Resident Evil 2, which is a little campy, but like they have the technology to just tell that story better or like recreate that experience better. And that's fine. I really love that reconstruction. But the amount of nostalgia pandering that is present in current culture is concerning because I know what happens when people get too much of something. There's a reason why I can't listen to some of the Bruno Mars songs, even though they're good, is because it's just overplayed to the extent that I can't enjoy it anymore. And I'm afraid that it's gonna be similar, that nostalgia from a certain time is just gonna get so overbearing at some point that we're just not gonna enjoy it anymore. It's like how Marvel has ruined Dad Rock for all of us. Like, it's just something that we don't enjoy anymore. It's in the past. And Dad Jazz is the new thing. That's the kind of thing that will start to happen. But that's just my opinion, the final bit. That's the cultural bit, that is. And remember that nostalgia will be used to you to pander to you to buy something. But till then, just reminisce about how fun Reddit was 6 years ago or something. I don't know. Whatever you want to be nostalgic about. Alright, people, that's all I have for you this week. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you liked this episode, please go to YouTube and subscribe to that YouTube channel. And go follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. If that's your thing, I share memes on most of those platforms. Along with that, if you really, really, really like the content and think it's worth $1, please support us on Patreon. The link is down